Yes, welcome back. I will be talking a little bit about middleware and what middleware function is. So middleware functions are functions that we can inject in between. So a request comes into our application and then it comes out at some point. And we can kind of go in and call a function that intercepts the request on its way as a response. So it comes in, that it can hit our function, and then later on it can respond with something. This might seem a little bit weird, but I'll try and show it as good as I can, and I think it makes a little bit more sense with code. So how do we define some middleware function? We use the app.use. App.use, as we saw before, we can use with the router, but we can also just use it with any function. So we can say app.use, request, response, and then a function called next. Just like, what do we normally use middleware functions for? Well, it can be, for example, handling if a user is logged in or if he is not logged in. That's something that you need to do on every request on sites where there is authentication for users. So every request needs to come in, and some code needs to say, is this user logged in or is it not logged in? That's like a typical kind of middleware functionality. Another functionality is that maybe you want that every request that comes into your website gets somehow logged somewhere. It could maybe even just be like logging it out to the console. It could also be like saving it to a database or something like that. There you have a request coming in, and then you have a function that kind of looks at the request, and then it just sends the request on. Okay? So this is a middleware function. It has request and response like we've seen before, and then it has a function called next. Okay? This is a key, and this is a function. So let's try and say console.log request. Let's just see what the request actually is. So we start up the server, and now if we just reload the site, then we see here that it spitted out like a huge object. And this has got everything related to the request. So like events, writable server stuff, headers, everything that is related. So it's a huge object. We can do request.headers. Then we can see only the headers of the request, which can be interesting to look at. So if we reload it here, and we scroll all the way down, now we see that this is the request for the headers for the request that I sent here on my browser. It has like a host that's called localhost 3000, something called accept, connection, pragma, those kind of things. And now if we go back to the application here, you see that we are saying localhost 3000 / Benjamin. Okay, so that means that this part here, where we said like listen for all the requests that comes to /Benjamin, but it's never coming in here. We don't see in here Benjamin, and we are not responding with Benjamin. That's because we've set a function up in the middle of the request coming in, and here where we are responding to it. Okay, so here we are kind of taking control of the request. Okay, we now have the control in our power, right? And we're not doing anything with it. So the request comes in, but now to send the request on, to keep it kind of going in the direction that it wants to, we can call the function called next, which means request, you can just keep on doing whatever you were doing. Okay? And now we should see that we are responding, okay? So when we are not sending on the request got blocked, okay? We are loading here, nothing's happening here. If we call the next function, now we are sending the request on so that the function that is here even gets called, okay? We don't even call this when we are not calling the next function, okay? So with the next function, we control what happens with the request, okay? When we call next, the request keeps going, okay? Now, the cool thing about this is that I can on the request, I can, for example, see request dot, and then I could, for example, say is on Chrome browser, okay? And I could maybe do some like smart functionality where I check like I check the user agent and I say if Mozilla then I need to say like request.headers dot host dot user agent. I can't say dot when there's a dash in the key. So here I get the user agent, and then I say if that includes Mozilla, then I'm of course not on a Chrome, I'm on Firefox. Okay. So this is some functionality you could build in your middleware. You could take the request and you can check if it's a Firefox browser or if it's not a Firefox browser, and depending on that you can do different things, okay? And the cool thing about that is that now here later on, after you've run the middleware function, now you can actually check the request that is on Firefox browser. I don't know if this code works. Maybe it doesn't. It's not so important, okay, for this exercise. It's just showing like an example of what you could do. So let's try and reload this. We get a response. We're happy. And here it says true. Okay, so we are logging out the is on Firefox browser, and then we are logging out this, right? So here we are like intercepting the request. We are implementing some functionality that, for example, could check if we are on a Firefox browser or if we are not. And then we put on, we make like an extra key on the request object that we can use later on. So here we could also make some functionality that is like, is a Danish speaker, for example. We could maybe take a look at, there's one that's called language or something like that. You see here, accept language. We could take a look, and maybe we want to have some functionality later on that checks if a user is talking English or Spanish or Chinese or whatever, and maybe we want to serve some different, for example, translations for our website or something like that, right? So this is a real world kind of scenario. You could like have you could make one that just called language. That might be really helpful, where you kind of extract from the header the language. Okay, but that's what the middleware function is. Yes, I hope that makes sense. Thank you. Bye.